Welcome to the Buddhist bookshelf. Buddhist Thien Phuc, also known as Mr. Ngoc Tran, is a dedicated scholar and author. His profound works, including dictionaries and volumes on integrating Buddhism into daily life, are the result of over 2 decades of unwavering commitment, despite a bustling life in the United States. His offering, Sorrowless Flowers, is an accessible bilingual masterpiece featuring 592 lectures on Buddha's teachings, representing inner peace. This selfless endeavor is a priceless contribution to Buddha Dharma. These volumes, commemorating the Buddha's enlightenment in 2011, are a spiritual gift known for their thorough exploration of Buddha's beliefs, teachings, and practices. Highly recommended for all seeking happiness and serenity through understanding and practicing Buddha Dharma. Your support, through likes, shares, and subscriptions, means the world to us. Let's dive in this valuable book, shall we? The Sorrowless Flowers. Preface. 26 centuries ago, Prince Siddhartha was born in Lumbini Park, under a sorrowless tree. On that occasion, Prince Siddhartha had already had the chance to rule a kingdom, but he had refused. He renounced all luxurious materials and wandered through the forest by himself. After 6 years of ascetic cultivation, eventually he discovered the middle way for his cultivation path and became a Buddha. Even though the Buddha passed away 2,500 years ago in Kusinagara, a small village in northern India, his teachings of love, wisdom and worry-free approach never died. And Buddhism is still a great religion which has been enlightening human beings for more than 25 centuries. When the Buddha appeared, wonderful events happened. The forest of Ashoka trees bloomed with beautiful flowers at the same time with the blooming of the Udambara forest. An Udambara tree is said to bear fruit without flowers. It is said to bloom once in a very long period of time, about 3,000 years. Some Buddhologists believe that in symbols and analogies, sorrowless flowers and Udambara flowers are just one. However, botanists confirm that these two plants are totally different. There are no distinctions between these two flowers in the Measureless Life Sutra, Volume 1. The sutra mentions, it is extremely difficult to encounter the Udambara flowers in measureless kalpas because they only appear at the right time. The Udambara flower is a symbol of the rare appearance of a Buddha. This flower is said to bloom once every 3,000 years. For this reason, it is often used as an illustration of how difficult it is to come in contact with true Buddhist teachings, as well as the rarity of encountering a Buddha. No matter how Udambara and sorrowless flowers are similar or different, we still be certain that each word of the Lord Buddha is a rare and wonderful petal of this sorrowless flower that penetrates deeply into our heart. As a matter of fact, the Buddha once said, just as the ocean, although vast, is of one taste, the taste of salt, so is my teaching, although many-faceted and vast as the ocean, is of one taste, the taste of worrylessness of nirvana. Nirvana in Buddhism is not a place to come. It is a condition of total cessation of changes, of perfect rest, of the absence of desire, illusion and sorrow, as well as a state of the total obliteration of everything that constitutes a physical man, and a state of no more rebirth. The purpose of this small book is to highlight all the petals of the sorrowless flowers that the Buddha handed down more than 25 centuries ago. These petals of the sorrowless flowers of the Buddha will have great effect in our life, if we really want to listen to him and do accordingly. In fact, if we really want to listen to him and do accordingly, then these petals of the sorrowless flowers, which the Buddha handed down to us, will help us release from all sorrows, as well as bondages, superstitious practices and all other sufferings and afflictions in this world. These petals of the sorrowless flowers in this book will help us see the core ideas of a sorrowless life that any Buddhist would like to adopt in his life. These petals of the sorrowless flowers were the embodiment of the virtues of the Buddha. During the 45 years of teaching, the Buddha translated all his words into action and caused the blooming of the forest of the sorrowless flowers for the next many generations. Certainly, everyone already experienced being worried and miserable. If so, let us read this book together, for its theme is dedicated to those who worry themselves unduly, even until the time of approaching death. Worries and miseries are two disasters that go hand in hand at all times. If you feel worried, you are miserable. If we really would like to cultivate exactly the way that the Buddha cultivated almost 26 centuries ago, we hope that this little book can help us all hear the whispers of Sakyamuni Buddha telling us to renounce the worldly life but not to run away from life, but to face it with mindfulness. Renouncing the worldly life means renouncing mindless and careless actions that lead to problems. Renouncing the worldly life means renouncing its noise, its stresses and strains which damage our nervous system and lead to hundreds of thousands of physical and mental illnesses. Renouncing the worldly life does not mean that we renounce our life. It means that we are making an inward journey in the worldly life. Only that we are able to see ourselves as we really are, and then we can learn to overcome the weaknesses and limitations to build a stronger life. A lot of us have been searching for solutions to our various problems in vain because of our wrong approach and method. We think all problems can be solved externally, but that is wrong. Most problems are internal and can only be solved when we try to make an inward trip to examine ourselves first. This book is only designed to show readers some of the petals of the sorrowless flowers for any Buddhists who want to have worry-free life, especially lay people. Remember that the Buddha was a real human being, not a myth. He gave a message on a sorrowless and liberated life to mankind in the world. Everyone should respectfully keep these sorrowless flowers handed down by the Buddha, for they are the results of his great wisdom. The nature of enlightenment of the sorrowless flowers will help us see clearly the roots of all sins, causing ignorance, and thus, we can eliminate what needs be eliminated. According to the Buddha, all the worries, miseries, afflictions, discontents and disappointments in life are caused by the three poisons of desire, anger, and ignorance. His eternal message has thrilled people through the ages. For Buddhists, his message has become petals of the sorrowless flowers, which are more needed for a sorrowful, suffering and afflictive society today. In fact, not only Buddhists, the whole world today turns more and more towards these sorrowless flowers handed down to us from the Buddha, because these flowers alone represent the conscience of humanity. We hope that this little book can provide us with the essence of Buddhist thoughts. More than 2,500 years passed by, but these sorrowless flowers of the Buddha never wither. On the contrary, they have only added to the vitality of the truth that he once lectured. These sorrowless flowers clearly represent the great teacher's teachings and continue to blossom in a world full of worries, miseries, afflictions and darkness in the same manner as a garden of flowers in the spring brings the vitality to all humankind. People can examine the Buddha Dharma with whatever suits them. Someone compares the Buddha Dharma with a bridge well built of flexible steel that is never destroyed by time. Others compare his teachings as a radiance that goes through a world of suffering and darkness. For this book, we respectfully consider the Buddha's teachings as the sorrowless flowers that have the ability to eliminate all sufferings and afflictions for all human beings. The Buddha was born in Lumbini Park, under an Ashoka tree. During his life, he had tried his best to bring these sorrowless flowers to all human beings. These sorrowless flowers show us his teachings are quite opposed to the sorrowful and gloomy attitude and is misunderstood by some people. For these reasons, the sorrowless flowers of the Buddha will last as long as the sun, the moon and beings still exist upon the earth. If we are willing to follow these sorrowless flowers, that is willing to live and to follow teachings of the Dharma, surely escape worries, misery as well as sufferings and afflictions. And we will be able to dwell our minds in an eternal nirvana. Like it or not, this very moment is all we really have to work with. Unfortunately, most of us always forget what we are in. We hope that we are able to bring these sorrowless flowers to our daily activities and are able to live our very moment connected to ourselves, as well as are able to accept the truth of this moment in our life. So, we can learn from it and move on in our real life. Anaheim, August 3, 2011. Thien Phuc. Introduction. Mr. Ngoc Tran, Dharma name is Thien Phuc, is a Buddhist scholar who has an extensive knowledge of Buddhism. Thien Phuc is also the author of Vietnamese English Buddhist Dictionary, English Vietnamese Buddhist Dictionary, The Basic Buddhist Doctrines, and 10 volumes of Buddhism in Daily Life. These books help Buddhists understand the application of Buddhist theory in their daily activities. After reading these volumes, I sincerely commend Thien Phuc, who has spent more than 2 decades studying and compassing these books, regardless of his busy and hurried life in the United States. Today, Mr. Thien Phuc Ngoc Tran brought me a draft of 3 volumes called The Sorrowless Flowers and asked me to write an introduction for this work. The work is written in Vietnamese and English and is very easy to understand. After reading the 3 volumes of The Sorrowless Flowers, I found all 592 lectures in these books were written about the Buddha's teachings. And each lecture can be considered as a sorrowless flower, which handed down by the Buddha to all of us. Sorrowlessness means a state of mind that is without sorrow or without worry. In Buddhism, sorrowlessness means something that does not disturb the body and mind. In other words, these are the sorrowless flowers with the power to bring the most peaceful state of mind to all of us. I think whoever has the opportunity to read the Sorrowless Flowers will achieve the most peaceful states of mind. After reading these volumes, I sincerely thank Mr. Thien Phuc Ngoc Tran, who sacrificed so much time in his busy life in the United States in order to be able to complete this work and contribute to our unlimited happiness and peace for all of us. This work is the unthinkable merit of giving of the Buddha Dharma. I also want to take this opportunity to send my appreciation to Mr. Thien Phuc Ngoc Tran for his altruism. For the sake of all beings' unlimited happiness and peace, he spends so much time to complete this work. By the commemoration festival of the Buddha's Enlightenment in the year of 2555, 2011, I am glad to introduce this great work to all readers. This is precious spiritual nourishment for everybody. After reading these 3 volumes, I am glad to send my personal congratulations to Ngoc Tran for these books and his laborious, detailed and extensive work in highlighting details and summarizing the beliefs, teachings and practices of Lord Sakyamuni Buddha. I am very pleased to praise the author's merits for his accomplishment of this rare religious and cultural work. These books are a genuine contribution to the propagation of the Dharma. I would like to take this opportunity to highly recommend it to all monks, nuns, Buddhist practitioners, as well as to any readers of Buddhist texts. With the hope that each and every one of you will possess and to utilize the book series of the Sorrowless Flowers as a guide to aid in your deeper study of Buddha Dharma, so that we can all have peaceful and happy lives at the present moment. As we understand the core meanings of the Buddha Dharma and as we understand the exact meanings of the Dharma, we can put them into practice to improve our body and mind, and, eventually, to attain the way. Respectfully, Most Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. 26 centuries ago, Prince Siddhartha was born in Lumbini Park, under a sorrowless tree. On that occasion, Prince Siddhartha had already had the chance to rule a kingdom, but he had refused. He renounced all luxurious materials and wandered through the forest by himself. After 6 years of ascetic cultivation, eventually he discovered the middle way for his cultivation path and became a Buddha. Even though the Buddha passed away 2500 years ago in Kusinagara, a small village in northern India, his teachings of love, wisdom and worry-free approach never died. And Buddhism is still a great religion which has been enlightening human beings for more than 25 centuries. When the Buddha appeared, wonderful events happened. The forest of Ashoka trees bloomed with beautiful flowers at the same time with the blooming of the Udambara forest. An Udambara tree is said to bear fruit without flowers. It is said to bloom once in a very long period of time, about 3,000 years. Some Buddhologists believe that in symbols and analogies, sorrowless flowers and Udambara flowers are just one. However, botanists confirm that these 2 plants are totally different. There are no distinguishes between these 2 flowers in the Measureless Life Sutra, Volume 1. The sutra mentions, it is extremely difficult to encounter the Udambara flowers in measureless kalpas because they only appear at the right time. The Udambara flower is a symbol of the rare appearance of a Buddha. This flower is said to bloom once every 3,000 years. For this reason, it is often used as an illustration of how difficult it is to come in contact with true Buddhist teachings, as well as the rarity of encountering a Buddha. no matter how Udambara and Sorrowless Flowers are similar or different, we still be certain that each word of the Lord Buddha is a rare and wonderful petal of the sorrowless flower that penetrates deeply into our heart. As a matter of fact, the Buddha once said, "Just as the ocean, although vast, is of one taste, the taste of salt, so is my teaching, although many-faceted and vast as the ocean, is of one taste, the taste of worrylessness of nirvana." Nirvana in Buddhism is not a place to come, it is a condition of total cessation of changes, of perfect rest, of the absence of desire, illusion and sorrow, as well as a state of the total obliteration of everything that constitutes a physical man, and a state of no more rebirth. The purpose of this small book is to highlight all the petals of the sorrowless flowers that the Buddha handed down more than 25 centuries ago. These petals of the sorrowless flowers of the Buddha will have great effect in our life if we really want to listen to him and do accordingly. In fact, if we really want to listen to him and do accordingly, then these petals of the sorrowless flowers, which the Buddha handed down to us, will help us release from all sorrows, as well as bondages, superstitious practices and all other sufferings and afflictions in this world. These petals of the sorrowless flowers in this book will help us see the core ideas of a sorrowless life that any Buddhist would like to adopt in his life. These petals of the sorrowless flowers were the embodiment of the virtues of the Buddha. During the 45 years of teaching, the Buddha translated all his words into action and caused the blooming of the forest of the sorrowless flowers for the next many generations. Certainly, everyone already experienced being worried and miserable. If so, let us read this book together, for its theme is dedicated to those who worry themselves unduly, even until the time of approaching death. Worries and miseries are two disasters that go hand in hand at all times. If you feel worried, you are miserable. If we really would like to cultivate exactly the way that the Buddha cultivated almost 26 centuries ago, we hope that this little book can help us all hear the whispers of Sakyamuni Buddha telling us to renounce the worldly life, but not to run away from life, but to face it with mindfulness. Renouncing the worldly life means renouncing mindless and careless actions that lead to problems. Renouncing the worldly life means renouncing its noise, its stresses and strains which damage our nervous system and lead to hundreds of thousands of physical and mental illnesses. Renouncing the worldly life does not mean that we renounce our life. It means that we are making an inward journey in the worldly life. Only that we are able to see ourselves as we really are, and then we can learn to overcome the weaknesses and limitations to build a stronger life. A lot of us have been searching for solutions to our various problems in vain because of our wrong approach and method. We think all problems can be solved externally, but that is wrong. Most problems are internal and can only be solved when we try to make an inward trip to examine ourselves first. This book is only designed to show readers some of the petals of the sorrowless flowers for any Buddhists who want to have worry-free life, especially lay people. Remember that the Buddha was a real human being, not a myth. He gave a message on a sorrowless and liberated life to mankind in the world. Everyone should respectfully keep these sorrowless flowers handed down by the Buddha, for they are the results of his great wisdom. The nature of enlightenment of the sorrowless flowers will help us see clearly the roots of all sins, causing ignorance, and thus, we can eliminate what needs be eliminated. According to the Buddha, all the worries, miseries, afflictions, discontents and disappointments in life are caused by the three poisons of desire, anger, and ignorance. His eternal message has thrilled people through the ages. For Buddhists, his message has become petals of the sorrowless flowers, which are more needed for a sorrowful, suffering and afflictive society today. In fact, not only Buddhists, the whole world today turns more and more towards these sorrowless flowers handed down to us from the Buddha, because these flowers alone represent the conscience of humanity. We hope that this little book can provide us with the essence of Buddhist thoughts. More than 2,500 years passed by, but these sorrowless flowers of the Buddha never wither. On the contrary, they have only added to the vitality of the truth that he once lectured. These sorrowless flowers clearly represent the great teacher's teachings and continue to blossom in a world full of worries, miseries, afflictions and darkness in the same manner as a garden of flowers in the spring brings the vitality to all humankind. People can examine the Buddha Dharma with whatever suits them. Someone compares the Buddha Dharma with a bridge well built of flexible steel that is never destroyed by time. Others compare his teachings as a radiance that goes through a world of suffering and darkness. For this book, we respectfully consider the Buddha's teachings as the sorrowless flowers that have the ability to eliminate all sufferings and afflictions for all human beings. The Buddha was born in Lumbini Park, under an Ashoka tree. During his life, he had tried his best to bring these sorrowless flowers to all human beings. These sorrowless flowers show us his teachings are quite opposed to the sorrowful and gloomy attitude and is misunderstood by some people. For these reasons, the sorrowless flowers of the Buddha will last as long as the sun, the moon and beings still exist upon the earth. If we are willing to follow these sorrowless flowers, that is willing to live and to follow teachings of the Dharma, surely escape worries, misery as well as sufferings and afflictions. And we will be able to dwell our minds in an eternal nirvana. Like it or not, this very moment is all we really have to work with. Unfortunately, most of us always forget what we are in. We hope that we are able to bring these sorrowless flowers to our daily activities and are able to live our very moment connected to ourselves, as well as are able to accept the truth of this moment in our life. So, we can learn from it and move on in our real life. 1. The world during the pre-Buddhism. About 3,000 years BC, along the river Indus, there grew up a city-based civilization known as the Indus Valley culture. The two greatest cities were at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, for which reason this has been termed the Harappan culture. According to Andrew Skilton in The Concise History of Buddhism, this society appears to have been highly organized and very conservative, showing little change over many centuries. Attempts to reconstruct customs and beliefs of this society are largely speculative, though most suggestive items that have been recovered, such as seals used in extensive trading, especially in the coastal areas. These show a form of writing, as yet undeciphered. One famous seal shows a masked human figure in a yogic posture, thought by some to be performing a primitive form of yoga or meditation. This civilization gradually declined in around 1,200 years BC, possibly as a result of environmental changes, most probably the change of direction in the flow of the river Indus. However, this is not likely to have been linked with the coincidental appearance of invading tribes from the northwest. Probably, these newcomers found their way to northern India when the culture there was in its dead time. Many scholars believed that this was not a military invasion, but a cultural osmosis. No matter what had happened, military invasion or cultural osmosis or the dying out of the Indus Valley culture, this continent had become new homeland for large waves of migrating nomadic tribes, pushed out from their old homeland, which originally stretched from Central Europe to Central Asia. After climbing various passes through the Himalayas to the northwest of present-day India's frontier with Nepal, these Aryan tribes began a complete sweep eastward across the entire subcontinent in the next several centuries. These Aryan tribes brought with them their own beliefs of polytheism. They also brought with them their own social caste system, which divided society into three classes: priests, warriors, and farmers. The first of these were professional reciters of hymns and performers of ritual, the predecessors of the later Brahmana class. The last two classes were similar to the Kshatriya and Vaisya classes. All this known because of the survival of the texts produced by these people's descendants. These are basic scriptures of Brahmanism, not recognizing by Buddhists. Before Buddhism, Hinduism, the traditional social religious structure of the Indian people and its origin is still mystic. It has neither a founder nor a fixed canon. It incorporated for centuries all aspects of truth. Hindus believe in the law of karma. Hinduism or Brahmanism, the general name given to the social cultural religious system of the Indo-Aryan, who migrated into India just before the dawn of history. The maintenance of the four castes, see four castes in India, which assures the supremacy of the priest caste, the Brahmana. Appeasement of the gods by means of rituals derived from the sacred Vedas. Complete faith and fidelity to the theory of karma and reincarnation, with rebirth in heaven seen as the final goal of earthly life. There is a universal law which operates throughout all life. Whatever is sown must be reaped sometime and somewhere. This is the law. Every action, every intention to act, every attitude bears its own fruit. A man becomes good by good deeds and bad by bad deeds. It is to say each person is fully responsible for his own condition and cannot put the blame on anyone else. You are what you are because of what you have done in the past. To a Hindu, the past, of course, would include all previous lives or existences. In Hindu tradition, the main duties assigned to women were childbearing and housework. Thus it considers a single life as a wasted life, and unmarried women were subject to scoffs. The stories in the Vedas reveal a great deal about the Indian people who were searching for answers about life around them, as well as about the remote universe. The oldest sacred books of Hinduism called the Vedas. They are ancient poems and hymns which were composed more than 3,000 years ago. The Brahmanic rules which the priests use for rituals of worship dated from between 1200 and 1000 BC. The great epics are philosophical and religious poems about legendary heroes and gods. They were ancient stories that had been told for generations before they were written at about the 1st century BC. A short section of one of the epics, the Bhagavad Gita, has become the favorite religious text in India. According to Hindu teachings, every person has a specific place in life and specific responsibilities. Each person is born where he is, and with particular abilities that he has, because of past actions and attitudes. There are 4 main castes in Hinduism. Within the 4 castes, there are dozens of subdivisions. Through the years, more than 1,000 levels of castes have appeared in Indian social life, but all belong to one of the 4 main groups. In ordinary social life, caste lines have frequently reflected real injustices and strong prejudices. Even thoughtful Hindus today realize that abuses have crept into the system. Many efforts have been made in the direction of straightening out some of the gross injustices. Gandhi was one who gave freely of his energies in restoring the untouchables to caste status. First, the intellectual priest group. Second, the nobility, including the warriors. Third, the administrative group, including merchants and landowners. Fourth, the great masses of people who do the common work of a society. The class of so-called untouchables or outcasts, recently abolished by Indian law, was composed of people who had originally belonged to different subgroups of the 4th caste, the masses. Through various social and economic conditions, they lost caste or lost their place in society. The most important goal for each person to achieve is release from the influence of past unhappiness. Each person has the fundamental aim all through life of escaping from Maya through union with Brahman. The life of pleasure, fulfillment of all normal human desires, including the very important desires rooted in sex. Hindus do not reject the sensory experiences of life, development of creative relationships with other people, aesthetic appreciation, and sexual expression. The Hindus value these experiences when used correctly and not regarded as the only goal of life. Participation in economic activity or public welfare, which includes working in some worthwhile job or profession. Each person has an obligation to himself and to society to do some useful work. For this he receives the wherewithal for his daily needs. Living the right kind of moral or ethical life. One has a duty to him and to others to do what is expected of him morally and ethically. The duty has been rather specifically defined in India, for each caste has a code of actions and attitudes which are expected of its members. And to this code a person is pledged through all his endeavors if he wishes to attain the good life. The Upanishads, dating from about 800 BC, are the answers that the renowned hermit teachers of that period gave to questions about life in the universe. Shortly before the time of the Buddha, the earliest prose Upanishads were compiled, which dealt with a secret teaching, to be passed from master to disciples only. The Upanishads were regarded as the final stage in the evolution of the Veda, and therefore known as the Vedanta, the culmination of the Veda. The ritual elements so prevalent in the earlier texts are less important here, and in their place we find a secret teaching on rebirth. According to the Upanishads, on the one hand, people looked for that which was the basis of the external phenomenal world, the underlying essence of all external objects and things, which were termed Brahman. On the other hand, they looked for the ultimately existent thing within the individual, that which supports life and consciousness in each of us, to be termed Atman. The secret teaching in the Upanishads taught that Atman and Brahman were one and the same. Caste lines, even people belonged to the noble class, also tried to restore the untouchables to caste higher statuses. We all know that the growth of any civilization in the world has been accompanied by recurrent waves of disillusion with power and material wealth. This very reason mobilized the resources of the spirit against the existing power system. In India, the reaction forces arose in the northwest regions. From the beginning, Buddhism developed around Benares and Patna, where the Iron Age had thrown up ambitious warrior kings who had established large kingdoms with big cities. In opposition to superstitions and divine power, the Buddha always stressed that he was only a guide, not an authority, and that all propositions must be tested, including his own. While Buddhism sprouted in India, in China one of the great religions also started: Confucianism. The system of morality growing out of the teachings of the Chinese philosopher Confucius, which stressed on filiality, respect for the elderly, loyalty, propriety, faith, justice, decency and shame. Confucius, 557–479, was born in the state of Lu. He lived in the time when the moral and cultural tradition of Chao were in rapid decline. In attempting to uphold the Chao culture, he taught poetry, history, ceremonies and music to about 3,000 disciples. He was the first Chinese great educator that Chinese people still give him the title Master of 10,000 years. However, Confucianism and Buddhism are totally different. Confucianism emphasizes on the ideas of family and society. Confucianism emphasizes on teaching children to grow up, to get married, to bear children and grandchildren, to continue the family line, to be a productive member in society. In contrast, Buddhism is founded on the essence of abandoning worldly ways, to leave home, to detach from family, parents, wife, husband, children, relatives, friends, etc. Therefore, Confucian scholars considered Buddhism as wicked and false teachings. That was why when Buddhism was first introduced into China, it was strongly opposed by Confucian scholars. However, the popularity of the Buddha and his disciples largely depended upon his method of approach to the masses. The Buddha had asked his disciples to preach his doctrine in the people's own language. The people were naturally impressed. Taoism is one of the big religions in China. This religion was founded by Lao Tzu, at the same time with Buddhism in India. Its doctrines are based on Tao or way of nature. Taoist practitioners traditionally strive for immortality, which, in Buddhism, is a classic example of deluded attachment to the body. 2. The formation of Buddhism. About 7 centuries BC, India was divided into 16 zones, 8 of which were kingdoms and the remaining republics. Indian society before and at the time of the Buddha was a society that had full of conflicts, especially struggles for power and material wealth. During this period, many people were not able to find satisfaction in Hinduism to their daily life's disturbing problems. Because of this dissatisfaction, some religious reforms shortly arose in an attempt to rid Hinduism of its superficiality. One of these reforms was to be the beginning of Buddhism. About 600 BC, the Buddha not only expounded the Four Noble Truths as the core of his teaching, which he had recognized in the moment of his enlightenment, he had also shown people how to live wisely and happily, and therefore, his teaching soon spread from India throughout Asia and beyond. Spiritually speaking, he mobilized people to stand up to fight against the existing power system. In fact, Buddhism is not a new religion in India, it is only a symbol of separation with Hinduism. As we can see, while the religion of the Veda allowed animal sacrifice to propitiate the gods, Buddhism set its face against sacrifices. Moreover, Buddhism waged strong campaigns against this practice. Because the sacrificial ritual required the services of Brahmins, who had specialized in religious ceremonies, while ordinary people, from one generation to another, could only do labor works. Thus, Buddhism denounced the caste system at that time in India. And the Buddha denounced all claims to superiority on the ground of birth as the Brahmins claimed. Buddhism denounced all social distinctions between man and declared that it was karma, the action of man, that determined the eminence or lowness of an individual. The Buddha confirmed with his disciples the insistence on the equality of social status based on one's actions and not on the lineage of birth of that person. Another revolutionary idea we can find in Buddhism was the fact that it widely opened the doors of organized religious life to women and men alike. In addition to distinguished nuns and lay Buddhist women, such as Khema, Padakara, and Dhammadinna, Sujata, Visakha, and Samavati, even courtesans like Amrapali were not denied opportunities to embrace the religious life. For these reasons, from the beginning in Northeast India almost 26 centuries ago, Buddhism penetrated not only in the heart of Asian people, but since the 19th century, it also became part of the thinking and practice of a lot of people in Europe and America as well. About the 7th century BC, many people questioned the value of their own religion, Hinduism. According to Hinduism's theories, they had to be reborn to the same class forever. If they belonged to the class of Sudra, they would be reborn into that class life after life. At first, Prince Siddhartha always concerned with burning questions as, why was there unhappiness? Or how could a man be happy? Etc. He diligently performed ascetic practices, but after 6 years of persevering search and strenuous self-denial, he still had not found the answers for these problems. After spending 6 years in seeking a solution of emancipation through ascetic practices without any success, Prince Siddhartha determined to find the answer in thought and meditation. After 49 days and nights of meditation under the Bodhi tree, he had become the awakened one. The path that the Buddha had found was the middle path, which was in between extremes. The extremes to be avoided were the life of sensual indulgence on the one hand, and the life of drastic asceticism on the other. Both led to out-of-balance living. Neither led to the true goal of release from sufferings and afflictions. The Buddha declared, to find the middle path to harmonious living, each person must search thoughtfully, not wasting any time in wordy arguments. Each person must explore and experiment for himself without any exception. During almost 26 centuries, both Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism have proved adaptable to changing conditions and to different peoples in the world, with the belief that what the Buddha discovered can help almost everyone. For the question, why am I unhappy? The Buddha suggests, because you fill yourself with wanting, until the wanting is a thirst that cannot be satisfied even by the things you want. How can I be happy? By ceasing to want. Just as a fire dies down when no fuel is added, so your unhappiness will end when the fuel of excessive is taken away. When you conquer selfish, unwise habits and hopes, your real happiness will emerge. 3. For the sake of a great cause. The Buddha arose in this world for the sake of a great cause, or because of a great matter. The Buddha appeared for the changing beings from illusion into enlightenment, according to the Lotus Sutra, or the Buddha nature, according to the Nirvana Sutra, or the Joy of Paradise, according to the Infinite Life Sutra. According to the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha is a unique being. An extraordinary man arises in this world for the benefit of sentient beings, for the happiness of sentient beings, out of compassion for the world, and for the good of gods and men. The Buddha founded Buddhism. Some says that Buddhism is a philosophy of life, not a religion. In fact, Buddhism is not strictly a religion in the sense in which that word is commonly understood, for it is not a system of faith and worship to a supernatural God. Buddhism is neither a philosophy. In the contrary, the Buddha's message is really for human beings in daily life. Keeping away from all evil deeds, cultivation of a moral life by doing good deeds and purification of mind from worldly impurities. This message originated from the Buddha's realization of the truth. As a prince living in the lap of luxury, The Buddha started to ponder very deeply on why living beings suffer in this world. He asked himself, what is the cause of this suffering? One day while sitting under a tree as a young boy, he saw a snake suddenly appear and catch an eel. As the snake and the eel were struggling, an eagle swooped down from the sky and took away the snake with the eel still in its mouth. That incident was the turning point for the young prince to start thinking about renouncing the worldly life. He realized that living beings on the earth survive by preying on each other. While one being tries to grab and the other tries to escape, and this eternal battle will continue forever. This never-ending process of hunting and self-preservation is the basis of our unhappiness. It is the source of all suffering. The prince decided that he would discover the means to end this suffering. He left his father's palace at the age of 29, and 6 years later he gained enlightenment. According to the Buddha, the law of cause and effect controls all beings. Karma simply means action. If a person commits a bad action, karma, it will be impossible for that person to escape from its bad effect. The Buddha is only a master who can tell beings what to do and what to avoid, but he cannot do the work for anyone. In the Dhammapada Sutra, the Buddha clearly stated, "You have to do the work of salvation yourself. No one can do anything for another for salvation except to show the way." 4. The Buddha. The word Buddha is not a proper name, but a title meaning enlightened one or awakened one. Prince Siddhartha was not born to be called Buddha. He was not born enlightened, however, efforts after efforts, he became enlightened. Any beings who sincerely try can also be freed from all clingings and become enlightened as the Buddha. All Buddhists should be aware that the Buddha was not a god or any kind of supernatural being. Like us, he was born a man. The difference between the Buddha and an ordinary man is simply that the former has awakened to his Buddha nature, while the latter is still deluded about it. However, whether we are awakened or deluded, the Buddha nature is equally present in all beings. Buddha is an epithet of those who successfully break the hold of ignorance, liberate themselves from cyclic existence, and teach others the path to liberation. The word Buddha derived from the Sanskrit root bud, to awaken. It refers to someone who attains nirvana through meditative practice and the cultivation of such qualities as wisdom, patience, and generosity. Such a person will never again be reborn within cyclic existence, as all the cognitive ties that bind ordinary beings to continued rebirth have been severed. Through their meditative practice, Buddhas have eliminated all craving and defilements. The Buddha of the present era is referred to as Sakyamuni, sage of the Sakya. He was born Siddhartha Gautama, a member of the Sakya clan. The Buddha is one awakened or enlightened to the true nature of existence. The word Buddha is the name for one who has been enlightened, who brings enlightenment to others, whose enlightened practice is complete and ultimate. The term Buddha derived from the Sanskrit verb root bud meaning to understand, to be aware of, or to awake. It describes a person who has achieved the enlightenment that leads to release from the cycle of birth and death, and has thereby attained complete liberation. The Buddha is the enlightened one. Chinese translation is to perceive in knowledge. Buddha means a person who has achieved the enlightenment that leads to release from the cycle of birth and death, and has thereby attained complete liberation. There are 3 degrees of enlightenment. Enlightenment derived from oneself, enlighten others, and attain the Buddhahood. The Buddha is the enlightened one with great loving kindness. He benefited and perfected of the self, to benefit oneself, or to improve himself for the purpose of improving or benefiting others. Self-benefiting for the benefit of others, unlimited altruism and pity being the theory of Mahayana. Self-profit profit others, the essential nature and work of a bodhisattva, to benefit himself and benefit others, or himself press forward in the Buddhist life, in order to carry others forward. Hinayana is considered to be self-advancement, self-salvation by works or discipline. Bodhisattva Buddhism is saving oneself in order to save others, or making progress and helping others to progress, Bodhisattvism being essentially altruistic. The second step is benefiting or perfecting of others, to benefit others. And the third step is to attain of Buddhahood. The Buddha is the person who has achieved the enlightenment that leads to release from the cycle of birth and death, and has thereby attained complete liberation. The word Buddha is not a proper name, but a title meaning enlightened one or awakened one. Prince Siddhartha was not born to be called Buddha. He was not born enlightened, nor did he receive the grace of any supernatural being. However, efforts after efforts, he became enlightened. It is obvious to Buddhists who believe in reincarnation that the Buddha did not come into the world for the first time. Like everyone else, he had undergone many births and deaths, had experienced the world as an animal, as a man, and as a god. During many rebirths, he would have shared the common fate of all that lives. A spiritual perfection like that of a Buddha cannot be the result of just one life. It must mature slowly throughout many ages and eons. However, after his enlightenment, the Buddha confirmed that any beings who sincerely try can also be freed from all clingings and become enlightened as the Buddha. All Buddhists should be aware that the Buddha was not a god or any kind of supernatural being, supreme deity, nor was he a savior or creator who rescues sentient beings by taking upon himself the burden of their sins. Like us, he was born a man. The difference between the Buddha and an ordinary man is simply that the former has awakened to his Buddha nature, while the latter is still deluded about it. However, the Buddha nature is equally present in all beings. According to the Zen sects, Buddhists accept the historic Sakyamuni Buddha neither as a supreme deity, nor as a savior who rescues men by taking upon himself the burden of their sins. Rather, it venerates him as a fully awakened, fully perfected human being who attained liberation of body and mind through his own human efforts, and not by the grace of any supernatural being. According to Buddhism, we are all Buddhas from the very beginning. That means every one of us is potentially a Buddha. However, to become a Buddha, one must follow the arduous road to enlightenment. Various classifications of the stages of Buddhahood are to be found in the sutras. A Buddha in the highest stage is not only fully enlightened but a perfect one who has become whole, complete in himself, that is, one in whom all spiritual and psychic faculties have come to perfection, to maturity, to a stage of perfect harmony, and whose consciousness encompasses the infinity of the universe. Such a one can no longer be identified with the limitations of his individual personality, his individual character and existence. There is nothing by which he could be measured, there are no words to describe him. 5. Buddha's birthday. In the year 563 BC, a baby was born into a royal family in northern India. He grew up in wealth and luxury, but soon found that worldly comfort and security do not guarantee real happiness. He was deeply moved by the suffering he saw all around, so he resolved to find the key to human happiness. When he was 29, he left his wife and child and his royal palace and set off to sit at the feet of the great religious teachers of the day to learn from them. They taught him much, but none really knew the cause of human sufferings and afflictions and how it could be overcome. Eventually, after 6 years' study and meditation, he had an experience in which all ignorance fell away, and he suddenly understood. From that day onwards, he was called the Buddha, the awakened one. He lived for another 45 years, in which time he traveled all over northern India, teaching others what he had discovered. His compassion and patience were legendary, and he made hundreds of thousands of followers. In his 80th year, old and sick, but still happy and at peace, he finally passed away into nirvana. It couldn't have been an easy thing for the Buddha to leave his family. He must have worried and hesitated for a long time before he finally left. There were two choices: dedicating himself to his family or dedicating himself to the whole world. In the end, his great compassion made him give himself to the whole world. And the whole world still benefits from his sacrifice. This was perhaps the most significant sacrifice ever made. Nowadays, there are still some discussions over the exact year of the Buddha's birth. However, the majority of opinions favor 623 BC. The Buddha's birthday was the day of the full moon in May. It was a beautiful day. The weather was nice and a gentle breeze was blowing. All the flowers in the Lumbini Park were blooming, emitting fragrant scents, and all the birds were singing melodious songs. Together, they seemed to have created a fairyland on earth to celebrate the birth of the prince, a coming Buddha. According to the Indian legendaries, at that time, the earth shook, and from the sky, two silvery currents of pure water gushed down, one was warm and the other cool, which bathed the body of the prince. Nowadays, countries with Buddhist tradition usually celebrate the Buddha's birthday around the middle of the fourth month of the lunar year. Also, according to Indian legends, the more reliable Buddha's birthday, perhaps on the fourth month, 8th day. However, all Buddhist countries observe the full moon day of the lunar month of Visakhit, April-May, as Buddha birthday anniversary. For the Buddhist community, the most important event of the year is the celebration of the birth of the Buddha. It falls on the full moon day in the fourth lunar month, in May of the solar calendar. This occasion is observed by millions of Buddhists throughout the world. It is called Vesak in Sri Lanka, Visakha Puja in Thailand. On this day, Buddhists in some countries like China and Korea would take part in the ceremonial bathing of the Buddha. They pour ladles of water scented with flower petals over a statue of the baby Buddha. This symbolizes purifying their thoughts and actions. The temple are elegantly decorated with flowers and banners, the altars are full of offerings. Vegetarian meals are provided for all. Captive animals, such as birds and turtles, are set free from their cages. This is a very joyous day for everyone. According to the Theravada tradition, the Buddha's birthday, perhaps on the fourth month, 8th day. However, all Buddhist countries observe the full moon day of the lunar month of Visakhit, April-May, as Buddha birthday anniversary. This is one of the major festivals of Buddhism because most Buddhist countries celebrate the day on which the Buddha was born, attained awakening, and passed into nirvana. According to the Mahayana tradition, the month corresponding to April-May, on the full moon day of which is celebrated the birth, renunciation, enlightenment and parinirvana of the Buddha. The Vesak celebration consists of the presentation of the teaching, contemplation of the life of Buddha, the process around the sacred sites. Furthermore, Vesak festival goes beyond mere rhetorical commemoration, it is a reminder for each of us to strive to become enlightened. Even though the Buddha is dead but 2,500 years later his teachings still help and save a lot of people, his example still inspires people, his words still continue to change lives. Only a Buddha could have such power centuries after his death. The Buddha did not claim that he was a god, the child of God or even the messenger from a god. He was simply a man who perfected himself and taught that if we followed his example, we could perfect ourselves also. He never asked his followers to worship him as a god. In fact, he prohibited his followers to praise him as a god. He told his followers that he could not give favors to those who worship him with personal expectations or calamities to those who don't worship him. He asked his followers to respect him as students respect their teacher. He also reminded his followers to worship a statue of the Buddha to remind ourselves to try to develop peace and love within ourselves. The perfume of incense reminds us of the pervading influence of virtue, the lamp reminds us of the light of knowledge, and the followers which soon fade and die, remind us of impermanence. When we bow, we express our gratitude to the Buddha for what his teachings have given us. This is the core nature of Buddhist worship. A lot of people have misunderstood the meaning of worship in Buddhism, even sincere Buddhists. Buddhists do not believe that the Buddha is a god, so in no way they could possibly believe that a piece of wood or metal is a god. In Buddhism, the statue of the Buddha is used to symbolize human perfection. The statue of the Buddha also reminds us of the human dimension in Buddhist teaching, the fact that Buddhism is man-centered, not God-centered, that we must look within not without to find perfection and understanding. So in no way one can say that Buddhists worship God or idols. In fact, a long time ago, when primitive man found himself in a dangerous and hostile situations, the fear of wild animals, of not being able to find enough food, of diseases, and of natural calamities or phenomena such as storms, hurricanes, volcanoes, thunder, and lightning, etc. He found no security in his surroundings, and he had no ability to explain those phenomena. Therefore, he created the idea of gods in order to give him comfort in good times, courage in times of danger and consolation when things went wrong. They believed that God arranged everything. Generations after generations, man continues to follow his ancestors in a so-called faith in God without any further thinkings. Some says they believe in God because God responds to their prayers when they feel fear or frustration. Some say they believe in God because their parents and grandparents believed in God. Some others say that they prefer to go to church than to temple, because those who go to churches seem richer and more honorable than those who go to temples. 6. The historical Buddha Sakyamuni. The historical person with the name of Siddhartha, a fully enlightenment one who has reached the utmost, right and equal enlightenment. The lack of hard facts and information, even the date of the Buddha's life is still in doubt. Indian people believe that the Buddha's nirvana took place around 100 years before the time of King Asoka. However, most modern scholars agreed that the Buddha's birthday was in some time in the second half of the 7th century BC, and his nirvana was about 80 years after his birthday. The Buddha is the all-knowing one. He was born in 623 BC in northern India, in what is now Nepal, a country situated on the slope of Himalaya, in the Lumbini Park at Kapilavatthu on the Vesak full moon day of April. Almost 26 centuries ago, the Sakyas were a proud clan of the Khatiyas, the warrior caste, living on the foothill of the Himalaya in northern Nepal. His royal name was Siddhartha, and his family name was Gautama. He belonged to the illustrious family of the Akaka of the solar race. King Raja Suddhodana founded a strong kingdom with the capital at Kapilavatthu. His wife was Queen Mahamaya, daughter of the Kalya. Before giving birth to her child, according to the custom at that time, she asked for the king's permission to return to her parents' home in Devadaha for the childbirth. On the way to her parents' home, the queen took a rest at Lumbini Park, a wonderful garden where flowers filled the air with sweet odor, while swarms of bees and butterflies were flying around, and birds of all color were singing as if they were getting ready to welcome the queen. As she was standing under a flowering sala tree and catching hold of a branch in full bloom, she gave birth to a prince who would later become Buddha Gautama. All expressed their delight to the queen and her noble baby prince. Heaven and earth rejoiced at the marvels. The memorable day was the full moon day of Vesak, in May, in 623 BC. On the naming ceremony, many learned Brahmins were invited to the palace. A wise hermit named Asita told the king that two ways would open for the prince. He would either become a universal ruler or would leave the world and become a Buddha. Asita named the baby Siddhartha, which means the one whose wish is fulfilled. At first the king was pleased to hear this, but later he was worried about the statement that the prince would renounce the world and become a homeless hermit. In the palace, however, delight was followed quickly by sorrow. 7 days after the childbirth, Queen Mayu suddenly died. Her younger sister, Pajapati Gautami, the second queen, became the prince's devoted foster mother, who brought him up with loving care. Although grew up in a luxurious life of a prince with full of glory, he was kind and gentle. He received excellent education in both Vedas and the arts of warfare. A wonderful thing happened at a plowing festival in his childhood. It was an early spiritual experience which, later in his search for truth, served as a key to his enlightenment. Once on a spring plowing ceremony, the king took the prince to the field and placed him under the shade of a rose apple tree, where he was watched by his nurses. Because the king himself took part in the plowing, the prince looked at his father driving a golden plow together with other nobles, but he also saw the oxen dragging their heavy yokes and many farmers sweating at their work. While the nurses ran away to join the crowd, he was left alone in the quiet. Though he was young in age, he was old in wisdom. He thought so deeply over the sight that he forgot everything around and developed a state of meditation to the great surprise of the nurses and his father. The king felt great pride in his son, but all the time he recalled the hermit's prophecy. Then he surrounded him with all pleasures and amusements and young playmates, carefully keeping away from him all knowledge of pain, sadness and death. When he was 16 years old, the king Suddhodana arranged for his sons a marriage with the princess Yasodhara, daughter of King Sauprabhuda, who bore him a son named Rahula. Although raised in princely luxury and glory, surrounded with splendid palaces, his beautiful wife and well-behaved son, He felt trapped amidst this luxury. Like a bird in a gold cage, a fish in a silver vase. During a visit to the outskirts of the city, outside the four palace portals, he saw the spectacle of human suffering: an old man with white hair, fallen teeth, blurred eyes, deaf ears, and bent back, resting on his cane and begging for his food; a sick man lying at the roadside who moaned painfully; a dead man whose body was swollen and surrounded with flies and bluebottles; and a holy ascetic with a calm appearance. The four sights made him realize that life is subject to all sorts of sufferings. The sight of the holy ascetic, who appeared serene, gave him the clue that the first step in his search for truth was renunciation. Back in his palace, he asked his father to let him enter monkhood, but was refused. Nevertheless, he decided to renounce the world, not for his own sake or convenience, but for the sake of suffering humanity. This unprecedented resolution made Prince Siddhartha later become the founder of Buddhism. At the age of 29, one night he decided to leave behind his princely life. After his groom Chandala saddled his white horse, he rode off the real palace toward the dense forest and became a wandering monk. First, he studied under the guidance of the leading masters of the day, such as Alara Kalama and Dadaka Ramapada. He learned all they could teach him. However, he could not find what he was looking for. He joined a group of 5 mendicants, and along with them, he embarked on a life of austerity, and particularly on starvation, as the means which seemed most likely to put an end to birth and death. In his desire for quietude, he emaciated his body for 6 years and carried out a number of strict methods of fasting, very hard for ordinary men to endure. The bulk of his body was greatly reduced by this self-torture. His fat, flesh, and blood had all gone. Only skin and bone remained. One day, worn out, he fell to the ground in a dead faint. A shepherdess who happened to pass there gave him milk to drink. Slowly, he recovered his body strength. His courage was unbroken, but his boundless intellect led him to the decision that from now on he needed proper food. He would have certainly died had he not realized the futility of self-mortification and decided to practice moderation instead. Then he went into the Niranjana river to bathe. The 5 mendicants left him because they thought that he had now turned away from the holy life. He then sat down at the foot of the Bodhi tree at Gaya and vowed that he would not move until he had attained the supreme enlightenment. After 49 days, at the beginning of the night, he achieved the knowledge of former existence, recollecting the successive series of his former births in the 3 realms. At midnight, he acquired the supreme heavenly eye, perceiving the spirit and the origin of the creation. Then early next morning, he reached the state of all knowledge, realizing the origin of sufferings and discovering the ways to eliminate them, so as to be liberated from birth, death, and reincarnation. He became Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. His title was Sakyamuni Buddha. He attained enlightenment at the age of 35, on the 8th day of the 12th month of the lunar calendar, at the time of the morning stars rising. After attaining enlightenment at the age of 35 until his Mahaparinirvana at the age of 80, he spent his life preaching and teaching. He was certainly one of the most energetic men who ever lived. 49 years he taught and preached day and night, sleeping only about 2 hours a day. The Buddha said, "I am not the first Buddha to come upon this earth, nor shall I be the last. In due time, another Buddha will arise, a holy one, a supreme enlightened one, an incomparable leader. He will reveal to you the same eternal truth which I have taught you." 2 months after his enlightenment, the Buddha gave his first discourse entitled, "The Turning of the Dharma Wheel," to the 5 ascetics, the Kadanas, his old companions, at the deer park in Benares. In this discourse, the Buddha taught, avoiding the 2 extremes of indulgence in sense pleasures and self-mortification, the Tathagata has comprehended the middle path, which leads to calm, wisdom, enlightenment, and nirvana. This is the very noble eightfold path, namely, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Next he taught them the 4 noble truths: suffering, the cause of suffering, the ceasing of suffering, and the path leading to the ceasing of suffering. The Venerable Kadana understood the Dharma and immediately became a Sotapanna. The other four asked the Buddha to receive them into his order. It was through the second sermon on the no-self quality that all of them attained arahantship. Later the Buddha taught the Dharma to Yasa, a rich young man in Benares, and his 54 companions, who all became arahants. With the first 60 disciples in the world, the Buddha founded his Sangha, and he said to them, "I am free from all fetters, both human and divine. You are also free from all fetters. Go forth, bhikkhus, for the welfare of many, for the happiness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the good and welfare and happiness of gods and men. Preach the Dharma, perfect in the beginning, perfect in the middle, perfect in the end, both in spirit and in letter. Proclaim the holy life in all its fullness and purity." With these words, he sent them into the world. He himself set out for Uruvela, where he received 30 young nobles into the order and converted the 3 brothers Kassapa, who were soon established in arahantship by means of the discourse on fire. Then the Buddha went to Rahagaha to visit King Bimbisara. The king, on listening to the Dharma, together with his attendants, obtained the fruit of the first path and formally offered the Buddha his bamboo grove, where the Buddha and the Sangha took up their residence for a long time. There, the 2 chief disciples, Sariputra and Moggallana, were received into the order. Next, the Buddha went to Kapilavatthu and received into the order his own son, Rahula, and his half-brother Nanda. From his native land, he returned to Rahagaha and converted the rich banker Anathapindika, who presented him the Jeta grove. For 45 years, the Buddha traversed all over India, preaching and making converts to his religion. He founded an order of monks and later another order of nuns. He challenged a caste system, taught religious freedom and free inquiry, raised the status of women up to that of men, and showed the way to liberation to all walks of life. His teaching were very simple but spiritually meaningful, requiring people to put an end to evil, fulfill all good, and purify body and mind. He taught the method of eradicating ignorance and suppressing sufferings. He encouraged people to maintain freedom in the mind to think freely. All people were one in the eyes of the Buddha. He advised his disciples to practice the 10 supreme qualities: compassion, wisdom, renunciation, discipline, willpower, forbearance, truthfulness, determination, goodwill, and equanimity. The Buddha never claimed to be a deity or a saint. He always declared that everyone could become a Buddha if he develops his qualities to perfection and is able to eliminate his ignorance completely through his own efforts. At the age of 80, after completing his teaching mission, he entered nirvana at Kusinara, leaving behind millions of followers. Among them were his wife Yasodhara and his son Rahula, and a lot of priceless doctrinal treasures considered even today as precious moral and ethical models. 7. 4 sights which changed the Buddha's life. Prince Siddhartha ventured beyond the palace walls 4 times, accompanied by his charioteer Chandaka, and the 4 sights that he encountered led to his renunciation of the world, one of the great turning points in his life. On his first outing, Siddhartha saw a wasted man supported himself with a stick. Chandaka explained that this was old age, and that it was the fate of all living beings, including the prince. When they heard about the incident, he doubled the number of guards around his son and increased the number of his entertainers. On his second outing, the prince came across a man afflicted with disease. Again Chandaka informed him that this misfortune can strike all living beings, including the prince. On his third outing, the prince saw a corpse, and Chandaka then discussed with him the nature and meaning of death. At the palace, Siddhartha became broody. No amount of entertainment could cheer him up. He was like a lion pierced in the heart by a poisoned arrow. He could not understand how people could be at peace with themselves or indulge in laughter when old age, illness and death existed in the world. Years later he would teach that such suffering is always present and would offer a solution to this predicament. On his final outing, Siddhartha saw a monk carrying a begging bowl. Chandaka told him that this man had abandoned the household life and had gone forth to lead the holy life of an ascetic in search of truth and happiness. There and then Siddhartha resolved to do the same. According to legends about Sakyamuni Buddha's life, shortly after his birth a fortune teller predicted that he would become a great king unless he encountered the four sights. 1. A sick person, 2. An old person, 3. A corpse, and 4. A world renouncer. The first three symbolize the harsh realities of cyclic existence, in which beings become sick, grow old, and die, and the fourth indicates the way to escape this, by renouncing the world and seeking liberation. According to tradition accounts, his father Suddhodana tried very hard to prevent him from encountering these sights, but was unsuccessful. The young prince went out into the town of Kapilavastu on 4 occasions, and during each of these he was confronted by one of the 4 sights. He subsequently resolved to leave his father's palace and become a world renouncer. The reason we call these 4 visions 4 significant visions because these 4 visions changed the whole life of Prince Siddhartha, who became Buddha later. When the prince grew up, King Suddhodana's strong and fervent wish was that he should get married, bring up a family, and be his worthy successor, for the prediction of the sage Kandana always haunted him, and he feared that one day the prince would give up home for the homeless life of an ascetic. According to the custom of Indian at that time, at the very early age of 16, the prince was married to his cousin, the beautiful Princess Yasodhara, the only daughter of King Supabuddha and Queen Pamita of the Kaliyas. The princess was of the same age as the prince. King Suddhodana provided the prince with the greatest comforts. The prince had, so the story tells, 3 palaces, one of each for the Indian year's 3 seasons. Lacking nothing of the early joys of life, he lived amid song and dance, in luxury and pleasure, and knowing nothing of sorrow. Yet all the efforts of King Suddhodana to try to hold the prince a prisoner to the senses and made him worldly minded, were of no avail. King Suddhodana's endeavors to keep away life's miseries from his son's inquiring eyes only heightened Prince Siddhartha's curiosity and his resolute search for truth and enlightenment. With the advance of age and maturity, the prince began to glimpse the woes of the world. On one occasion, when the prince went driving with his charioteer Kanna to the royal garden, he saw to his amazement what his eyes had never beheld before. A man weakened with age, and in the last stage of aging, crying out in a mournful voice, "Help, master! Lift me to my feet, ho, help! Or I shall die before I reach my house." This was the first shock the prince received. The second was the sight of a weak man, mere skin and bones, supremely unhappy, forlorn, hopeless, suffered, and depressed. He was suffering a serious illness. The strength was gone, and all the grace and joy of life was also gone. On a third occasion he saw a group of lamenting kinsmen bearing on their shoulders the corpse of their beloved one for cremation. These woeful signs, seen for the first time in his life, deeply moved him. From the charioteer he learned that even he, his beloved Princess Yasodhara, and all his relatives, without exception, are subject to old age, illness and death. Soon after this the prince saw a recluse moving with slow and imposing, majestic steps, downcast eyes, calm and serene, aloof, away from the world, and independent. He was struck by the serene countenance of the man. He learned from Channa that this recluse was one who had abandoned his home to live a life for purity, to seek truth and answer the troubles of life. Thoughts of renunciation flashed through the prince's mind, and in deep contemplation on the way home, the heartthrob of suffering human beings found a responsive echo in his mind. The more he came in contact with the world outside of his palace, the more he was convinced that the world was lacking in true happiness. But before reaching the palace he was informed by a messenger that a son had been born to Yasodhara. "A fetter is set upon me," he uttered, and returned to the palace. 8. 6 years of ascetic practicing of the Buddha. After Prince Siddhartha left the royal palace, he wandered in the forest of ascetics. There were many practicing ascetics. The prince consulted one of the elders. "How can I attain true enlightenment and emancipation?" The elder replied, "We practice asceticism diligently, hoping that upon our death we could be reborn in the heavens to enjoy happiness. We don't know anything about enlightenment and emancipation." The elder added, "The way we take to the asceticism is that when we are hungry, we eat grassroots, bark, flowers, and fruits. Sometimes we pour cold water on our heads all day long. Sometimes we sleep by a fire, allowing the body to be baked and tanned. Sometimes we hang ourselves upside down on tree branches. We practice in different ways, the purpose of which is to worship the sun, moon, stars, the running water and the blazing fire. After listening to the explanations of this elder, the wise prince knew that they had practically no knowledge of the problems of life and death, and they could not even redeem themselves, not to mention saving other sentient beings. The ascetics were merely inflicting sufferings upon themselves. Then Prince Siddhartha came to study with Masters Arata and Didraka. In a short time he mastered everything they had to teach him. But still he was not satisfied. My teachers are holy people, but what they taught me does not bring an end to all suffering. I must continue to search for the truth on my own. So the prince decided to relinquish this kind of ascetic life, left the forest and headed towards other places where the hermits were. He came to Gayu Hill to practice asceticism and meditation. The life which the prince led was very simple. He just ate a little wheat and barley every day, while devoting all his energy to his practice. So his body became thinner by the day. His body lost its radiance and became covered with dust and dirt. Eventually he looked like a living skeleton. But he still refused to give up his practices. After 6 years of ascetic practice, the prince could not reach his goal. He realized that it was a mistake to punish his body like that. Finally he realized that the major issue of enlightenment and emancipation could never be achieved through ascetic practicing alone. To find the truth, he must follow a middle path between too much pleasure and too much pain. 9. In the heavens above and earth beneath I alone am the honored. 1. The first words attributed to Sakyamuni after his first 7 steps when born from his mother's right side. In the heavens above and earth beneath I alone am the honored one. This is not an arrogant speaking, it bears witness to an awareness of the identity of I, the one's own true nature or Buddha nature with the true nature of the universe, not the earthly ego. This announcement is ascribed to every Buddha, as are also the same special characteristics attributed to every Buddha, hence he is the Tathagata come in the manner of all Buddhas. In Mahāyanism he is the type of countless other Buddhas in countless realms and periods. 10. The image of the Buddha in the Dharmapada Sutra. No one surpasses the one whose conquest is not turned into defeat again. By what track can you lead him? The awakened, the all-perceiving, the trackless? Dharmapada 179. It is difficult to seduce the one that has eradicated all cravings and desires. By which way can you seduce him? The trackless Buddha of infinite range, Dharmapada 180. Even the gods envy the wise ones who are intent on meditation, who delight in the peace of renunciation, Dharmapada 181. It is difficult to obtain birth as a human being, it is difficult to have a life of mortals, it is difficult to hear the correct law, it is even rare to meet the Buddha, Dharmapada 182. Not to do evil, to do good, to purify one's mind, this is the teaching of the Buddhas, Dharmapada 183. The Buddhas say, Nirvana is supreme, forbearance is the highest austerity. He is not a recluse who harms another, nor is he an ascetic who oppresses others. Dharmapada 184. Not to slander, not to harm, but to restrain oneself in accordance with the fundamental moral codes, to be moderate in eating, to dwell in secluded abode, to meditate on higher thoughts. This is the teaching of the Buddhas, Dharmapada 185. Even a shower of gold pieces cannot satisfy lust. A wise man knows that lusts have a short taste, but long suffering, Dharmapada 186. Even in heavenly pleasures the wise man finds no delight. The disciple of the supremely enlightened one delights only in the destruction of craving, Dharmapada 187. Men were driven by fear to go to take refuge in the mountains, in the forests, and in sacred trees, Dharmapada 188. But that is not a safe refuge, or no such refuge is supreme. A man who has gone to such refuge is not delivered from all pain and afflictions, Dharmapada 189. On the contrary, He who take refuge in the Buddhas, the Dharma and the Sangha, sees with right knowledge, Dharmapada 190. With clear understanding of the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the destruction of suffering, and the Eightfold Noble Path which leads to the cessation of suffering, Dharmapada 191. That is the secure refuge, the supreme refuge. He who has gone to that refuge is released from all suffering, Dharmapada 192. It is difficult to find a man with great wisdom, such a man is not born everywhere. Where such a wise man is born, that family prospers, Dharmapada 193. Happy is the birth of Buddhas. Happy is the teaching of the true law. Happy is the harmony in the Sangha. Happy is the discipline of the United Ones. Dharmapada 194. Whoever pays homage and offering, whether to the Buddhas or their disciples, those who have overcome illusions and got rid of grief and lamentation, Dharmapada 195. The merit of him who reverences such peaceful and fearless ones cannot be measured by anyone, Dharmapada 196. 11. First Sermon. After the Buddha's enlightenment at Buddha Gaya, he moved slowly across India until he reached the deer park near Benares, where he preached to 5 ascetics his first sermon. The sermon preached about the middle way between all extremes, the Four Noble Truths, and the Noble Eightfold Path. In the deer park, Benares, at first the Buddha was ignored by the 5 brothers of Kandinya, but as the Buddha approached them, they felt that there was something very special about him, so they automatically stood up as he drew near. Then the 5 men, with great respect, invited the Buddha to teach them what he has enlightened. So, the Buddha delivered his first teaching. Turning the wheel of the Dharma, he began to preach. O monk! You must know that there are 4 noble truths. The first is the noble truth of suffering. Life is filled with the miseries and afflictions of old age, sickness, unhappiness and death. People chase after pleasure but find only pain. Even when they do find something pleasant, they soon grow tired of it. Nowhere is there any real satisfaction or perfect peace. The second is the noble truth of the cause of suffering. When our mind is filled with greed and desire and wandering thoughts, sufferings of all types follow. The third is the noble truth of the end of suffering. When we remove all craving, desire, and wandering thoughts from our mind, sufferings will come to an end. We shall experience undescribable happiness. And finally, the noble truth of the path. The path that helps us reach the ultimate wisdom. 12. The meanings of Buddhism. To someone it can be only life of the Buddha, the example that the Buddha and his immediate disciples set, that glorious feat of a man who stood before men as a man and declared a path of deliverance. To others, Buddhism would mean the massive doctrine as recorded in the Buddhist Tripitaka literature, and it is described a very lofty, abstruse, complex and learned philosophy of life. The name Buddhism comes from the word bodhi, which means waking up, and thus Buddhism is the philosophy of awakening. Therefore, the real definition of Buddhism is noble truth. The Buddha did not teach from theories. He always taught from a practical standpoint based on his understanding, his enlightenment, and his realization of the truth. This philosophy has its origins in the experience of the man named Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, who was himself awakened at the age of 36. Buddhism is now older than 2,500 years old and has more than 800 million followers worldwide, including Chinese followers in mainland China. People in the West had heard of the Buddha and his teaching as early as the 13th century when Marco Polo, 1254. 1324, the Italian traveler who explored Asia, wrote accounts on Buddhism in his book, Travels of Marco Polo. From the 18th century onwards, Buddhist texts were brought to Europe and translated into English, French and German. Until 100 years ago, Buddhism was mainly an Asian philosophy, but increasingly it is gaining adherents in Europe and America. At the beginning of the 20th century, Alan Bennett, an Englishman, went to Burma to become a Buddhist monk. He was renamed Ananda Mitaya. He returned to Britain in 1908. He was the first British person to become a Buddhist monk. He taught Dharma in Britain. Since then, Buddhist monks and nuns from Sri Lanka, Thailand, Japan, China and other Buddhist countries in Asia have come to the West, particularly over the last 70 years. Many of these teachers have kept to their original customs, while others have adapted to some extent to meet the demands of living in a Western society. In recent years, there has been a marked growth of interest in Buddhism in Europe. The membership of existing societies has increased, and many new Buddhist centers have been established. Their members include large numbers of professionals and scholars. Today, Britain alone has over 140 Buddhist centers found in most major cities. To the Buddha, man is a supreme being, thus, he taught, "Be your own torch and your own refuge. Do not seek refuge in any other person." This was the Buddha's truthful word. He also said, "All realizations come from effort and intelligence that derive from one's own experience. Man is the master of his destiny, since he can make his life better or worse. If he tries his best to cultivate, he can become a Buddha." Buddhism is the only way that leads people from the evil to the virtuous, from deluded to fully enlightened sagehood. Buddhism is a philosophy, a way of life or a religion. The religion of the awakened one of the three great world religions. It was founded by the historical Buddha Sakyamuni over 25 centuries ago. Sakyamuni expounded the Four Noble Truths as the core of his teaching, which he had recognized in the moment of his enlightenment. He had shown people how to live wisely and happily, and his teaching soon spread from India throughout Asia and beyond. 13. A religion which is always based on human inner wisdom. Buddhism is a philosophy, a way of life or a religion. The teaching of Buddha. This is not important. Buddhism is what the Buddha taught. His teaching was based on human inner wisdom. Buddhism always values reason. Blindly believing in everything is contrary to Buddha's teaching. The Buddha taught, "Do not believe blindly in my teachings. Always test them like using fire to test gold to determine whether it is authentic or counterfeit." Buddhism is not a religion versed in worshipping and imploring favors from deities. It is different from other religions and doctrines in that it respects personal opinions, beliefs, and intellectual development. Buddhism does not prevent its disciples from learning other religious teachings. The Buddha said that if there were reasonable and rational teachings in other religions, his followers were free to respect such things. From that basic principle, the Buddha declared that there was nothing hidden in the sleeve of his saffron robe when referring to his teachings. He also added that his doctrine was consistent with how people understood the truth. It did not depend on the favors bestowed by any deity or any other spiritual power. The Buddha emphasized the concept of free inquiry when he asked his disciples to judge even the Tathagata in order to have an utter trustfulness in him. He asked them to study, understand, and believe later on. Whoever has not yet understood or still has doubt but blindly believes has thus defamed the Buddha. Doubt is not a sin because Buddhism has no creed to be believed. Doubt will automatically dissipate when people fully understand or perceive the truth. In short, whether the Buddha wanted or not, his teachings and the way of life preached by him became a religion called Buddhism. However, Buddhism is not a religion just for discussion, but it is a religion of deliverance for those who diligently cultivate. One needs not be a scholar or a blind devotee to become a Buddhist, all you need is your sincerity of cultivation. In Buddhism, blind faith has no ground. Each one of us must know how to find and absorb what is relevant and what is not to our life and to our problems. If we pay a little attention, we'll see that Buddhist doctrines are boundless and timeless, but they are the inconceivable truth for all time. Messages handed down to us by the Buddha remain eternally valuable. No one can argue against or deny the doctrine of impermanence in Buddhism. Impermanence does not mean that things are not existing. Impermanence means that everything continues in a flux, in a process of continuing change and evolution. Thus, Buddhism is able to adjust to different civilizations in different times in the world. Even in modern world, Buddhism is always appropriate in all circumstances. In fact, if you approach any sect of Buddhism, you will immediately find out that it is something relevant, beneficial and applicable to your daily life. Sincere Buddhists should always remember that in Buddhism, there is no such so-called bonds of supernatural ties, nor Godhead, nor creation, nor sin inherited from anyone else, other than what you yourself have done. 14. Is Buddhism atheistic? It is sometimes said that Buddhism is atheistic or a godless religion. However, the Buddha's teaching about the 6 realms of existence should surely disperse this notion. The Buddha states clearly that there exists a so-called the realm of gods in Buddhism, but gods in Buddhism are not those with almighty powers who can create the universe, or who can reward or punish other creatures. According to Buddhism, the gods may be worshipped for limited and worldly blessings, but being impermanent and worldly themselves, they cannot grant prayers concerned with that freedom or nirvana which is supermundane, and which they have not gained. Buddhism is only atheistic in the sense that it rejects as false the theory of first cause, a creator God. 15. A religion of the truth and a living philosophy. Someone says that the word religion is not appropriate to call Buddhism because Buddhism is not a religion, but a moral philosophy. For me, Buddhism is both a religion and philosophy of life based on the teachings set forth by Shakyamuni Buddha over 2500 years ago in India. Before going further, we should briefly analyze the 2 words Buddha and philosophy. First, the name Buddhism comes from the word buddhi, which means to wake up, and thus Buddhism is the philosophy of awakening. This philosophy has its origins in the experience of the man named Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, who was himself awakened at the age of 36. Buddhism is now older than 2,500 years old, and has almost 1/3 of the population of the world are its followers. Until 100 years ago, Buddhism was mainly an Asian philosophy, but increasingly it is gaining adherents in Europe and America. Secondly, the word philosophy comes from 2 words philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom or love and wisdom, both meanings describing Buddhism perfectly. Buddhism teaches that we should try to develop our intellectual capacity to the fullest, so that we can understand clearly. It also teaches us to develop loving kindness and compassion, so that we can be like, a true friend to all beings. So Buddhism is a philosophy, but not just a philosophy. It is the supreme philosophy. In the year 563 BC, a baby was born into a royal family in northern India. He grew up in wealth and luxury, but soon found that worldly comfort and security do not guarantee real happiness. He was deeply moved by the suffering he saw all around, so he resolved to find a key to human happiness. It couldn't have been an easy thing for the Buddha to leave his family. He must have worried and hesitated for a long time before he finally left. There were 2 choices: dedicating himself to his family or dedicating himself to the whole world. In the end, his great compassion made him give himself to the whole world. And the whole world still benefits from his sacrifice. This was perhaps the most significant sacrifice ever made. After careful considerations, when he was 29, he left his wife and child and his royal palace, and set off to sit at the feet of the great religious teachers of the day to learn from them. They taught him much, but none really knew the cause of human sufferings and afflictions, and how it could be overcome. Eventually, after 6 years' study and meditation, he had an experience in which all ignorance fell away, and he suddenly understood. From that day onwards, he was called the Buddha, the Awakened One. He lived for another 45 years, in which time he traveled all over northern India, teaching others what he had discovered. His compassion and patience were legendary, and he made hundreds of thousands of followers. In his 80th year, old and sick, but still happy and at peace, he finally passed away into nirvana. After the passing of Shakyamuni Buddha, his disciples recorded all of his teaching into scriptures called sutras. There is no one book that contains all the information the Buddha taught, but the total of more than 800 books that recorded a vast number of sutras, Vinaya and Abhidharma. In Buddhism, there is no distinction between a divine or supreme being and common mortals. The highest form of being is the Buddha. All people have the inherent ability and potential to become Buddhas if they follow and cultivate the teachings set forth by Shakyamuni Buddha. By following the Buddha's teachings and Buddhist practices, anyone can eventually become Buddhas. A Buddha is also a human being, but one who comes to a realization and thoroughly understands the workings and meaning of life in the universe. When one comes to that realization and truly knows and understands oneself and everything, he is called Buddha, or he is said to have attained enlightenment. He is also called the Enlightened One. Even though the Buddha is dead, but 2,500 years later his teachings still help and save a lot of people, his example still inspires people, his words still continue to change lives. Only a Buddha could have such power centuries after his death. The Buddha did not claim that he was a god, the child of God, or even the messenger from a god. He was simply a man who perfected himself and taught that if we followed his example, we could perfect ourselves also. He never asked his followers to worship him as a god. In fact, he prohibited his followers to praise him as a god. He told his followers that he could not give favors or blessings to those who worship him with personal expectations or calamities to those who don't worship him. He asked his followers to respect him as students respect their teacher. He also reminded his followers to worship a statue of the Buddha, means to remind ourselves to try to develop peace and love within ourselves. The perfume of incense reminds us of the pervading influence of virtue, the lamp reminds us of the light of knowledge, and the followers which soon fade and die remind us of impermanence. When we bow, we express our gratitude to the Buddha for what his teachings have given us. This is the core nature of Buddhist worship. A lot of people have misunderstood the meaning of worship in Buddhism, even devout Buddhists. Buddhists do not believe that the Buddha is a god, so in no way they could possibly believe that a piece of wood or metal statue is a god. In Buddhism, the statue of the Buddha is used to symbolize human perfection. The statue of the Buddha also reminds us of the human dimension in Buddha's teaching, the fact that Buddhism is man-centered, not God-centered, that we must look inward, within, not outward, without, to find perfection and understanding. So in no way one can say that Buddhists worship God or idols. In fact, a long time ago, when primitive man found himself in a dangerous and hostile situations, the fear of wild animals, of not being able to find enough food, of diseases, and of natural calamities or phenomena such as storms, hurricanes, volcanoes, thunder, and lightning, etc. He found no security in his surroundings, and he had no ability to explain those phenomena. Therefore, he created the idea of gods in order to give him comfort in good times, encourage him in times of danger, and consolation when things went wrong. They believed that God arranged everything. Generations after generations, man continues to follow his ancestors in a so-called faith in God without any further thinkings. Some says they believe in God because God responds to their prayers when they feel fear or frustration. Some say they believe in God because their parents and grandparents believed in God. Some others say that they prefer to go to church than to temple, because those who go to churches seem richer and more honorable than those who go to temples, and so on, and so on. The main teachings of the Buddha focus on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. They are called noble because they ennoble one who understands them, and they are called truths because they correspond with reality. Buddhists neither believe in negative thoughts, nor do they believe in pessimistic ideas. In the contrary, Buddhists believe in facts, irrefutable facts, facts that all know, that all have aimed to experience, and that all are striving to reach. Those who believe in God or gods usually claim that before an individual is created, he does not exist, then he comes into being through the will of a god. He lives his life, and then, according to what he believes during his life, he either goes to eternal heaven or eternal hell. Some believe that they come into being at conception due to natural causes, live and then die or cease to exist, that's it. Buddhism does not accept either of these concepts. According to the first explanation, if there exists a so-called Almighty God who creates all beings with all his loving kindness and compassion, it is difficult to explain why so many people are born with the most dreadful deformities, or why so many people are born in poverty and hunger. It is nonsense and unjust for those who must fall into eternal hells because they do not believe and submit themselves to such a so-called Almighty God. The second explanation is more reasonable, but it still leaves several unanswered questions. Yes, conception due to natural causes, but how can a phenomenon so amazingly complex as consciousness develop from the simple meeting of two cells, the egg and the sperm? Buddhism agrees on natural causes, however, it offers more satisfactory explanation of where man came from and where he is going after his death. When we die, the mind, with all the tendencies, preferences, abilities and characteristics that have been developed and conditioned in this life, re-establishes itself in a fertilized egg. Thus the individual grows, is reborn and develops a personality conditioned by the mental characteristics that have been carried over by the new environment. The personality will change and be modified by conscious effort and conditioning factors like education, parental influence and society, and once again at death, re-establish itself in a new fertilized egg. This process of dying and being reborn will continue until the conditions that cause it, craving and ignorance, cease. When they do, instead of being reborn, the mind attains a state called nirvana, and this is the ultimate goal of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths, a fundamental doctrine of Buddhism which clarifies the cause of suffering and the way to emancipation. Sakyamuni Buddha is said to have expounded the Four Noble Truths in the Deer Park in Sarnath during his first sermon after attaining Buddhahood. The Buddha organized these ideas into the Fourfold Truth as follows. Life consists entirely of suffering. Suffering has causes. The causes of suffering can be extinguished, and there exists a way to extinguish the cause. The Noble Eightfold Path are the 8 right, correct ways. The path leading to release from suffering, the goal of the third in the Four Noble Truths. These are 8 in the 37 Bodhi ways to enlightenment. Practicing the Noble Eightfold Path can bring about real advantages, such as improvement of personal conditions. It is due to the elimination of all evil thoughts, words, and actions that we may commit in our daily life, and to the continuing practice of charitable work, improvement of living conditions. If everyone practiced this noble path, the world we are living now would be devoid of all miseries and sufferings caused by hatred, struggle, and war between men and men, countries and countries, or peoples and peoples. Peace would reign forever on earth, attainment of enlightenment or bodhi awareness. The Noble Eightfold Path is the first basic condition for attaining bodhi consciousness that is untarnished, while alaya consciousness is still defiled. The mind is immeasurable. It not only benefits immeasurable living beings, bringing immeasurable blessings to them, and producing immeasurable highly spiritual attainments in a world, in one life, but also spreads all over immeasurable worlds, in immeasurable future lives, shaping up immeasurable Buddha. The 4 immeasurables are infinite Buddha states of mind. The 4 kinds of boundless mind, or 4 divine abodes. These states are called illimitables because they are to be radiated towards all living beings without limit or obstruction. They are also called Brahmaviharas or divine abodes, or sublime states, because they are the mental dwellings of the Brahma divinities in the Brahma world. In both forms of Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana, the Buddha taught his disciples, especially lay disciples, to keep the 5 precepts. Although details are not given in the canonical texts, Buddhist teachers have offered many good interpretations about these 5 precepts. The 5 basic commandments of Buddhism. The 5 basic prohibitions binding on all Buddhists, monks and laymen alike, however, these are especially for lay disciples. The observance of these 5 ensures rebirth in the human realm. Besides, the truth of cause and effect also plays an extremely important role in Buddhism. Cause is a primary force that produces an effect. Effect is a result of that primary force. The law of causation governs everything in the universe without exception. Law of cause and effect are the relation between cause and effect in the sense of the Buddhist law of karma. The law of causation, reality itself is cause and effect in momentary operation. Every action which is a cause will have a result or an effect. Likewise, every resultant action or effect has its cause. The law of cause and effect is a fundamental concept within Buddhism governing all situations. The moral causation in Buddhism means that a deed, good or bad or indifferent, brings its own result on the doer. Good people are happy and bad ones unhappy. But in most cases happiness is understood not in its moral or spiritual sense, but in the sense of material prosperity, social position, or political influence. For instance, kingship is considered the reward of one's having faithfully practiced the 10 deeds of goodness. If one meets a tragic death, he is thought to have committed something bad in his past lives, even when he might have spent a blameless life in the present one. Causality is a natural law, mentioning the relationship between cause and effect. All things come into being not without cause, since if there is no cause, there is no effect and vice versa. As so shall you reap. Cause and effect never conflict with each other. In other words, cause and effect are always consistent with each other. If we want to have beans, we must sow bean seeds. If we want to have oranges, we must sow orange seeds. If wild weeds are planted, then it's unreasonable for one to hope to harvest edible fruits. One cause cannot have any effect. To produce an effect, it is necessary to have some specific conditions. For instance, a grain of rice cannot produce a rice plant without the presence of sunlight, soil, water, and care. In the cause there is the effect, in the effect there is the cause. From the current cause, we can see the future effect, and from the present effect we discern the past cause. The development process from cause to effect is sometimes quick, sometimes slow. Sometimes cause and effect are simultaneous, like that of beating a drum and hearing it sound. Sometimes cause and effect are 3 or 4 months away, like that of the grain of rice. It takes about 3 to 4 or 5 to 6 months from a rice seed to a young rice plant, then to a rice plant that can produce rice. Sometimes it takes about 10 years for a cause to turn into an effect. For instance, from the time the schoolboy enters the elementary school to the time he graduates a 4-year college, it takes him at least 14 years. Other causes may involve more time to produce effects, maybe the whole life or 2 lives. By understanding and believing in the law of causality, Buddhists will not become superstitious or alarmed and rely passively on heaven authority. He knows that his life depends on his karmas. If he truly believes in such a causal mechanism, he strives to accomplish good deeds, which can reduce and alleviate the effect of his bad karmas. If he continues to live a good life, devoting his time and effort to practicing Buddhist teachings, he can eliminate all of his bad karmas. He knows that he is the only driving force of his success or failure, so he will be discouraged, put the blame on others, or rely on them. He will put more effort into performing his duties satisfactorily. Realizing the value of the law of causality, he always cares for what he thinks, tells or does in order to avoid bad karma. Karma is one of the fundamental doctrines of Buddhism. Everything that we encounter in this life, good or bad, sweet or bitter, is a result of what we did in the past or from what we have done recently in this life. Good karma produces happiness, bad karma produces pain and suffering. So, what is karma? Karma is a Sanskrit word, literally means a deed or an action and a reaction, the continuing process of cause and effect. Moral or any good or bad action. However, the word karma is usually used in the sense of evil bent or mind, resulting from past wrongful actions, taken while living, which causes corresponding future retribution, either good or evil transmigration, action and reaction. The continuing process of cause and effect. Our present life is formed and created through our actions and thoughts in our previous lives. Our present life and circumstances are the product of our past thoughts and actions, and in the same way our deeds in this life will fashion our future mode of existence. A karma can be created by body, speech, or mind. There are good karma, evil karma, and indifferent karma. All kinds of karma are accumulated by the alaya vijnana and manas. Karma can be cultivated through religious practice, good, and uncultivated. For sentient being has lived through innumerable reincarnations, each has boundless karma. Whatever kind of karma is, a result would be followed accordingly, sooner or later. No one can escape the result of his own karma. As mentioned above, karma is a product of body, speech and mind, while recompense is a product or result of karma. Karma is like a seed sown, and recompense is like a tree grown with fruits. When the body does good things, the mouth speaks good words, the mind thinks of good ideas, then the karma is a good seed. In the contrary, the karma is an evil seed. Thus the Buddha taught. To lead a good life, you Buddhists should make every effort to control the activities of your body, speech, and mind. Do not let these activities hurt you and others. Recompense corresponds karma without any exception. Naturally, good seed will produce a healthy tree and delicious fruits, while bad seed gives worse tree and fruits. Therefore, unless we clearly understand and diligently cultivate the laws of cause and effect, or karma and result, we cannot control our lives and experience a life the way we wish to. According to the Buddha Dharma, no gods, nor heavenly deities, nor demons can assert their powers on us. We are totally free to build our lives the way we wish. If we accumulate good karma, the result will surely be happy and joyous. No demons can harm us. In the contrary, if we create evil karma, no matter how much and earnestly we pray for help, the result will surely be bitter and painful. No gods can save us. When we act, either good or bad, we see our own actions, like an outsider who witnesses. The pictures of these actions will automatically imprint in our alaya vijnana, subconscious mind. The seed of these actions are sown there, and await for enough conditions to spring up its tree and fruits. Similarly, the effect in the alaya vijnana, subconscious mind, of the one who has received our actions. The seed of either love or hate has been sown there, waiting for enough conditions to spring up its tree and fruits. The Buddha taught. If someone give us something, but we refuse to accept, naturally, that person will have to keep what they plan to give. This means our pocket is still empty. Similarly, if we clearly understand that karmas or our own actions will be stored in the alaya vijnana, subconscious mind, for us to carry over to the next lives, we will surely refuse to store any more karma in the subconscious mind pocket. When the subconscious mind pocket is empty, there is nothing for us to carry over. That means we don't have any result of either happiness or suffering. As a result, the cycle of birth and death comes to an end, the goal of liberation is reached. There is not a doubt that Buddhism was a religion of the truth and a living philosophy more than 26 centuries ago. It's still now a religion of the truth and a living philosophy in this very century, the 21st century. Buddhism is in accord with all the progresses of nowadays science, and it will always be in accord with science at all times. Its basic teachings of loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and right concentration, as well as the basic 5 precepts of not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, not lying and not drinking alcohol and not doing drugs, are always a torch that lights the darkness of the world. The message of peace and of love and happiness of Buddhism to living beings of all kinds is always the glorious truth for all human beings. Everyone can achieve the highest goal in Buddhism, no matter who is that person, clergyperson or layperson. However, the most important thing we all must remember is making an honest effort to follow the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha and his great disciples did not achieve their ultimate goal by accident. The Buddha and his disciples were once ordinary sentient beings like us. They were once afflicted by the impurities of the mind, attachment, aversion, and ignorance. They all became either Buddhas or saints now, but for us, we are still creating more and more unwholesome deeds, and continuing going up and down in the cycle of birth and death. Devout Buddhists should listen to the Buddha's teachings, should purify our actions, words and mind to achieve true wisdom, the wisdom that help us understand the truth, and to attain the ultimate goal of Buddhism. In other words, if we sincerely cultivate in accordance with the Buddha's teachings, one day not too far, every one of us would be able to do good deeds, to avoid bad deeds, every one of us would try our best to help others whenever possible and not to harm anyone. Our mind would be mindful at all times. Thus there is no doubt that the Buddha's Dharma will benefit us with happiness and prosperity in this life and in the next. Eventually, It will lead us to the ultimate goal of liberation, the supreme bliss of nirvana. This is the end of this video. Thank you for listening. Please continue to support and help this channel grow. As you already know, Buddha emphasized the importance of generosity supporting the spread of the Dharma for spiritual growth. We can cultivate this virtue in our digital age. Now I need your help spreading the Buddha teaching further by subscribing, liking, and sharing our channel. You're supporting the dissemination of valuable teachings, much like this Sangha was supported in the past. Your engagement accumulates positive karma for you and helps make the Dharma accessible to a wider audience, a meritorious act indeed. Let's do this with pure intentions, free from attachment and selfishness, fostering a sense of community and supporting our own spiritual journey. These principles, rooted in Buddhist ethics, continue to guide us. You will receive great blessings for supporting the propagation of Buddha's teachings in a very simple way. By subscribing, liking, and sharing to help spreading the Buddha teaching to all human beings. Wishing you and your family always have a peaceful and happy life.